Have you ever noticed that the most dangerous men rarely boast? That the most coveted don't need to chase after what they want? That true leaders don't shout orders, they simply exist, and the world bows down? Modern society has become accustomed to noise, to self-affirmation, to the hysteria of those who shout, "Look at me." But the real game, the game of seduction, of value, of influence, is silent. And this is the first wound I need to show you. The more you try to prove your worth, the less you have it. And if you haven't understood this yet, you're at the wrong end of the social food chain. There's a subtle cruelty behind the scenes of human interaction. A cold war where appearance is more lethal than intention, and where those who understand the codes of perception manipulate the behavior of others with the ease of moving pieces on a chessboard. Machiavelli knew this, and not only did he know, he taught how to win this game without playing fair, because the truth is simple and brutal. The world doesn't reward the just, it rewards the efficient. And social efficiency, especially for a man, isn't in real merit, but in the strategic perception of his worth. The modern tragedy is that many good men live like shadows. They have pure intentions, firm character, and intact moral sense, but they are invisible. Because nobody values what is readily available, nobody desires what is predictable. Nobody follows those who are constantly explaining themselves. That's why in this video you won't hear self-help advice. You're going to hear about strategy. You're going to understand, with Machiavelli as your guide and the social field as your battlefield, how to build an image that commands respect before words, a presence that captures attention even before touch, and a magnetism that transforms desire into need. And before you say this is manipulation, listen carefully. Every woman who has ever fallen for a cold, distant, emotionally inaccessible man was a victim of the same engineering. The difference is that he didn't know what he was doing. You will know. And knowledge transforms instinct into power. But let's be direct. If you continue to treat your value as something internal and invisible, hoping that people will perceive it in time, you will be ignored. Because the current world is visual, fast, and symbolic. The woman who could love your depth will never get to know your name. The man who could offer you opportunities will never listen to you. Because the first filter and the most decisive is what you project. Your image, your silence, your posture, your self-control. You don't need to become a scoundrel, but you do need to stop being naive. And that's where Machiavelli comes in. The author of The Prince, often demonized as the advocate of cruelty, was actually the first to reveal an uncomfortable secret. Power games are won by those who know how to feign weakness, appear predictable, and act at the most unexpected moment. And in the world of seduction, where desire and domination go hand in hand, the same principles apply. The 3 laws you're about to learn weren't created by him. They were inspired by him. Adapted to the 21st century, and if you apply them intentionally, you will not only appear to be a man of high value, you will be treated as such. And here's the first warning. These laws are not politically correct. They don't appeal to your morals. They appeal to your survival instinct, to your need to stand out in a social market saturated with mediocre men begging for attention. And yes, this will hurt, because you might see yourself reflected in behaviors that currently sabotage your magnetism. Perhaps you'll discover that your excessive kindness is mistaken for weakness, that your transparency has turned into predictability, that your insistence seems like desperation. But there's only one way to change that, with brutality. Strategic, calculated, silent. And that's what you're about to learn. Law 1. Possess a ruthless image. You may be the smartest man in the room, the most loyal, the most well-intentioned. But if your image doesn't scream power, you will be ignored. This is the first brutal truth that separates desirable men from disposable men. And here comes the first and most ruthless of laws, the law of the ruthless image. Machiavelli in The Prince coined a sentence that should be taught in schools. Men generally judge more by their eyes than by their hands, because everyone can see, but few can understand. This means that in the real world, truth is irrelevant. What matters is the appearance of truth. Or even more bluntly, it's not who you are, it's what you project. And when I talk about image, I'm not just referring to your clothes or your haircut. I'm referring to the invisible narrative that your body, your posture, and your expression tell even before you say a single word. The world doesn't wait for you to explain yourself. It has already judged you before the first sentence. Think of Cesare Borgia. He wasn't just a military commander. He was the living model of seductive leadership that inspired Machiavelli himself. Borgia knew that to dominate, strength wasn't enough. Mystery was necessary. He dressed in an almost sacred way, wore mystical symbols on his clothes, and rarely allowed himself to be seen outside controlled environments. And when he spoke, his voice was low, measured, as if each word were sacred. The result? He was seen as an entity, a force, someone above the ordinary world. This is a merciless image. You don't show who you are, you show what others need you to be. In the modern world, this ability has been lost. Most men are desperately trying to be authentic, believing this to be a virtue. But Machiavelli already said, it is necessary to appear virtuous, not to be. Why? Because perception shapes the response. A man who appears confident, even if internally he is in chaos, will still be seen as a reference. A man who exudes doubt, even if he's a genius, will be treated as a burden. Modern psychology confirms this with the phenomenon known as the halo effect. When a person displays a striking quality, beauty, confidence, charisma, the brain automatically assumes they possess other qualities, such as intelligence, leadership, and competence. It's a mental shortcut, and you can use it or fall victim to it, your choice. But here comes the most strategic point. A ruthless image requires editing. You can't show yourself completely. High-value men are selective even in their words. They speak little, and each sentence carries weight. They don't react with despair. They look, observe, remain silent, because they know that silence creates tension, and tension creates value. There's something almost magical in the power of not explaining yourself. When you respond to a provocation with a look, not a speech. When you smile in the face of an attack and don't retaliate. When you say no, simply and firmly, and don't justify your decision. This creates a profound psychological effect. The other person begins to project power onto you. Because the human mind fears what it doesn't understand and respects what it cannot predict. That's why men who talk too much are seen as needy, no matter how intelligent they are. Because the image they project is of someone who needs to be accepted, validated, who needs to convince. And the more you try to convince, the more the other person understands that you are in an inferior position. So how do you build this ruthless image? First, body posture. The way you enter a room defines your social position there. Open shoulders, low breathing, slow and firm steps. The body says, I belong here. And this changes how others react to you even before the first eye contact. Second, control of attention. Don't seek out glances, allow them to seek you out. If someone observes you, don't immediately return the gaze. Delay. Create curiosity. The high-value man never seems hungry for validation. Third, clothing is symbolic armor. Don't dress like everyone else. Create subtle signs of authority. Something that sets you apart without seeming caricatured. Women notice details. A dominant man is remembered for what he visually conveys before speaking. Fourth, calculated vocal delivery. Speak slowly, rhythmically, with strategic pauses. Nervous people speed up. Insecure people laugh at the end of sentences. Dominant people dictate the pace of the conversation. And finally, a fixed gaze and emotional economy. A firm, sustained gaze communicates something that words can never achieve. Dominance, control, value. An emotional economy, the ability not to react to everything, not to be easily shaken, transforms you into a mystery. And mystery, as we will see later, is the greatest psychological aphrodisiac that exists. But be careful. This is not about becoming an emotionless robot. It's about mastering your expression. Understanding that the world doesn't reward the genuine, it rewards the strategically edited. Nature has always rewarded camouflage, simulation, lethal appearance. The lion doesn't need to roar to be feared. It only needs to be seen. To end this chapter lightly would be a betrayal of your intelligence. Therefore, I leave you with a pointed thought. How many opportunities have you missed by appearing harmless? By smiling too much? By trying to please before being respected? How many times have you been ignored simply because you didn't seem like a threat? The truth is, the world treats with reverence those who exude authority. The rest is invisible. Law 2. Maintain invisible control. Have you ever wondered why the men who control situations the most are the ones who demonstrate the least effort? Why true leaders rarely shout? Why the most desired men don't chase after, don't beg, don't insist, and yet everything revolves around them? Because there is a type of power that isn't imposed, it infiltrates. A dominance that isn't declared, it's felt. And this is the second law that separates strategists from the desperate. The law of invisible control. Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But what he didn't explain directly, and what few understand, is that the most effective fear doesn't come from violence or threats. It is born from controlled uncertainty, from calculated silence, from strategically inserted doubt, from unpredictable behavior that plants the seed of discomfort in the other person's mind. An addictive discomfort that forces the person to try to decipher you. And in trying, they become trapped. Invisible control is the ability to influence without seeming controlling, to conduct an interaction without raising a hand, to generate desire, loyalty, or obedience without ever asking for it. It's the pinnacle of social intelligence. And if you understand this game, you move from a reactive position to that of a maestro. And nothing is more seductive than that. Psychology explains this phenomenon with what we call power ambiguity. When someone appears too powerful, the human mind reacts with resistance or envy. But when power is perceived, yet never declared, it transforms into magnetism. It's the same mechanism that makes silence more threatening than a shout, absence more impactful than constant presence, the "I don't know what he's thinking" more intriguing than any declaration. Don Draper, the iconic character from Mad Men, is a master of invisible control. He enters a room, observes everything without haste, and speaks only what is necessary at the exact moment. He doesn't try to win through quantity, but through the surgical quality of his presence. His strength lies in mastering rhythm, timing, and subtext. What he doesn't say echoes. What he hides becomes addictive. And that's exactly what most men lack today: the power of suggestion. Look, the average man tries to control through imposition. He wants to define the course of the conversation. He insists, he explains, he demands. This generates resistance. On the other hand, the man who masters this second law creates atmospheres. He organizes the environment without declaring authority. He guides without saying "come." He makes decisions, but makes it seem like it was his idea. And how does this apply to seduction? Simple. When you make your interest too clear, you lose value. When you try too hard to convince someone that you're good, you seem needy. When you're too available, too predictable, too accessible, you become disposable. On the other hand, if you create slight tension, if you oscillate between presence and absence, if you don't make clear what you're feeling, you plant doubts. And these doubts generate fascination. And fascination generates attachment. Here's where the tactic of balance between availability and detachment comes in. You appear enough to generate connection and disappear enough to provoke longing. You deliver emotional crumbs with depth and then withdraw. Not to punish, but to allow the other to desire you autonomously. It's like putting an irresistible aroma in the air and leaving the room. Whoever smelled it will follow you. Now, pay attention. This isn't about being cold. It's about having rhythm. It's about creating a game of tension and release. This is so powerful that some psychologists call this phenomenon intermittent reinforcement. The same principle that addicts people to slot machines. You never know exactly when the next reward will come, and that keeps you hooked. A man who understands this doesn't need to prove himself. He simply creates the right stimuli, in the right doses, and reaps the rewards. But simply disappearing isn't enough. True invisible control requires 3 layers. First, your presence needs to have an impact. When you're there, you're noticed. You create contrast. Your silence is weighty. Your speech is dense. Your listening is active. Your energy fills the environment with a silent intensity. Second, your absence needs to mean something. You don't disappear as punishment. You withdraw because your presence is valuable, and this must be felt, not explained. Third, your return needs to be a choice. You come back because you want to, not because you need to, not because you miss someone, but because you decided to. This transforms the reunion into a privilege, not a relief. And how to apply this to everyday interactions. Observe. Pause before responding. Look away before the other person looks away. Say, "I'll think about it," even when you already know the answer. Change the subject unexpectedly. Remove the emotion from your voice when the other person is agitated. Interrupt patterns. All of this disarms because it confuses, and when you confuse someone, you take control of their perception. A man who controls without seeming controlling also decides without seeming authoritarian. He doesn't say, "Let's do this." He says, "I was thinking, what if we went this way?" He doesn't impose, he guides with lightness. But in the end, he was the one who chose. That's the difference between the caricatured alpha male who imposes by force and the true social leader who imposes by presence. But this law also applies to yourself, because the first control you need to exercise is self-control. The man who reacts emotionally to everything, who justifies himself, who loses patience easily, who gets worked up at small setbacks, is a vulnerable man. True power begins when you master your own reactions, when you are not shaken by rejection, when you don't try to explain yourself after a no, when you don't negotiate with insecurity. This is brutally rare, and therefore, extremely valued. Now don't confuse this with apathy. Being emotionally centered doesn't mean being indifferent. It means being selective about what affects you. You don't react randomly. You choose when to respond, how to respond, and whether it's worth responding. And the most curious thing, the less you react, the more others react to you. And here is the cruelest contradiction of this law. The men who control the emotions of others are the ones who seem most detached. Those who generate the most desire are the ones who least demonstrate neediness. Those who are most followed are the ones who least seem to need to be followed. That's why the second law is so dangerous, because it demands that you let go of the impulse to connect at all costs. It demands that you embrace the discomfort of doubt, of waiting, of absence, of unpredictability. It demands that you sacrifice the momentary pleasure of validation for the long-term power of silent influence. We conclude this stage with a warning for the strong. If you apply this law intentionally, you will be called cold, calculating, manipulative. But this won't come from those who are in the game. It will come from those who have lost control over you. Because invisible control, when done well, exposes the emotional addiction of others. And nobody likes to realize they are being pulled by invisible strings. Law 3. The law of strategic necessity. Imagine a table full of options. Beautiful, interesting, well-presented objects. But only one of them is irreplaceable. All the others can be exchanged, forgotten, replaced. Only one, if missing, dismantles the system. This object doesn't need to shine brighter than the others. It doesn't need to shout. It simply exists, and everyone adjusts to it. This is the third law that transforms ordinary men into inevitable men, the law of strategic necessity. Most men seek acceptance. They want to be desired, noticed, chosen. But the truly high-value man doesn't seek desire. He becomes necessary, because desire fluctuates. Desire is fragile. Desire disappears when there is an oversupply. But necessity is a psychological anchor. When you become necessary, the other person no longer wants you. They need you. And it is at this level that you stop chasing and begin to attract with gravity. Machiavelli, in his cold view of human nature, already said, "Men forget the death of their father more quickly than the loss of their patrimony." It may seem cruel, but what he exposes here is what modern psychology confirms. The human mind values what represents emotional functionality. That is, what fulfills something deep, what generates results, what is useful, in the most visceral sense of the word. The function, not the intention. So here's the first truth of this chapter. You will not be valued for who you are. You will be valued for how you emotionally impact the lives of others. You can be funny, handsome, polite, but if you don't fill an emotional gap, you will just be another one. On the other hand, if you become the one who offers something rare, be it a feeling, an experience, a perspective, you become indispensable. And the indispensable is not rejected, it is protected. Let's look at some examples. Think of a guy who, upon arriving in any group, changes the energy. He brings humor, or wisdom, or tranquility, or creative chaos. He has a clear emotional identity, and that's why people will miss him when he's not around. That's what it means to be necessary. Now think of someone who is just a nice guy. Polite, always present, always agreeing. This person is pleasant, but disposable. because they lack a functional differentiator. The law of strategic necessity therefore demands that you create a specific emotional impact, and more, that you become scarce, because what is necessary and abundant becomes a commodity, and what is necessary and scarce becomes power. But how do you do that? First, you need to discover your dominant emotional function. What do you offer that is rare? And I'm not talking about status or money, I'm talking about emotion. Are you the man who calms, who challenges, who instigates, who protects, who leads, who reveals truths, who provokes desire without vulgarity? Identify that. Second, you need to edit your presence. Don't show up all the time. Don't respond immediately. Don't always be available. Create micro-absences, micro-silences. Create moments where your absence is felt, because scarcity amplifies the perception of value. A rare perfume, a rare drink, a rare opportunity, all of this has more impact than something that is always at hand. The same logic applies to you. Third, you need to know how to leave. Nothing increases someone's value more than the ability to leave at the peak. To end a conversation with a phrase that resonates. To leave an environment with elegance. To walk away from someone without drama. Those who know how to leave know how to be remembered. And those who are remembered intensely return with more power. The irony of this law is that it demands control of the ego, because the average man always wants to be present. He wants to show his worth. He wants to maintain contact, and because of that, he wears himself out. The man who masters this third law understands that not being present is a strategy. He doesn't fear silence. He doesn't fear absence. He knows that what he offers, no one else offers. And because of that, he can wait. But here's a brutal warning. You can only apply this law if you have something real to offer. Appearances can be constructed, control can be rehearsed, but necessity only exists when you've become someone who transforms the environment. You can't be necessary if you're just another one. So work on your depth, your skills, your perspective on the world. Be a problem solver, a generator of unique experiences, an emotional center of gravity. And then edit your frequency. An iconic example of this is the character Thomas Shelby from the Peaky Blinders series. He's not just the head of a gang, he's the brains, the moral compass, the calculated coldness, the shadow everyone needs for the structure to function. When he enters the scene, everyone adapts. When he is silent, everyone listens. When he withdraws, everyone feels it. He is necessary, and that's why even being cold, dark, imperfect, he is irresistible. You can be that kind of man. But you need to abandon the addiction to validation. You need to abandon the desire to be accepted. You need to replace "I want to be desired" with "I want to be indispensable." That changes everything. And remember, you don't become necessary by explaining. You become necessary by acting. Don't say you're different, show it. Don't say you understand, do it. Don't say you're always there, be there and then disappear. And when you return, bring something even rarer. The necessary man is a source, a compass, a center, and the whole system revolves around him, even if others don't consciously realize it. She doesn't want a man who loses himself in her. She wants a man who makes her lose herself in him. And that only happens when you understand the invisible game that governs desire. When you stop trying to please, when you step out of the position of value tester, and become the one who sets the emotional pace of the relationship. You don't need to be more handsome or richer. You just need to learn to control what other men give away for free, their own energy. Because the man who masters his own behavior masters attraction. And that's not theory, that's psychology, that's strategy. And if you felt all this makes sense, if you realize the mistakes you've been making, and if you want practical access to the map that transforms this awareness into action, then the next step is inevitable. Listen now to the audiobook The Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds. This is not just another generic seduction piece. It's a strategic, tested, straightforward system that teaches you what to say, how to act, how to create presence, mystery, and tension in less than 1 minute of interaction. All condensed into an audiobook that you can listen to repeatedly until these ideas are no longer just techniques, but part of your identity. What's at stake here isn't just winning over a woman. It's about mastering your own energy. And the man who masters that is never ignored again. Click now. Listen to the forbidden manual and become the one who doesn't chase, but the one she chases so as not to lose.